Visit www.flaskup.com for all your Mr. Pandaria raiding guide needs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man normal mode version of Ji-Kun in the Throne of Thunder raid. Now in order to complete this fight you'll want to bring 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers and a mixture of ranged and melee DPS. It doesn't really matter too much for this fight. So this fight's pretty fun, and flashbacks to a last resort in the Firelands, because specific players do actually get to fly about throughout this fight, which is also pretty fun, just as long as you try not to mess things up too much. So first of all we're going to take a look at the abilities that are done on the main platform, which is where the boss will be fought, and then later on in the video we'll take a look at the different platforms that are around the outside of the room, which is kind of the main center point for this fight. So when it comes to actually tanking this fight, there are 2 abilities that you do need to be aware of, and the first one is Infected Talons, and this is when Ji-Kun successfully attacks one of her players, which would obviously be the person that is tanking her. The tank will suffer 20,000 nature damage every 3 seconds for 10 seconds, and this is a stacking debuff. Now you don't really want to worry too much about those stacks, as opposed to the stacks from the next ability, which goes by the name of Talon Rake, and this is where she will inflict 175% weapon damage as physical damage, and also increase the damage received by the victim from future Talon Rakes by 50% for 1 minute. Now, due to the duration of this debuff on the tank, which is a minute, we decided it would be best to swap after you've got 2 stacks of this debuff, and then it's just a matter of healing through the damage that the infected Talons deals to the tank. And now if we move on to take a look at what your raid has to deal with, there are 3 main abilities that should be looked out for at all times. And the first ability goes by the name of Downdraft, and this is kind of like a Li Shi ability back in the Terrace of Endless Spring, and this is where Ji-Kun will just flap his wings really fast, and it will just give you a little pushback, and it will last for 8 seconds. Again, you just need to run into the pushback and not fall off the edge of the platform. The next ability goes by the name of Quills, and this is a raid-wide AoE damaging ability, and for 8 seconds, every second she will inflict 88,000 physical damage to every player in the raid. Now you can use abilities such as Bop and also Ice Block to avoid these kinds of things, but the damage is quite high actually. You should probably use those abilities as well as Hard Heal. And the third ability that you need to look out for is called Core, and this is where she will target 2 random players and send piercing sound waves at their location. Yeah, she's not just a pretty looking bird, she's loud as well. And when these sound waves reach that player's location, they will inflict 300,000 physical damage to anyone standing within 8 yards. So it's pretty simple to get around that one really, you just move away from the impact location. So now if we move on to the really awesome part of the fight, we'll take a look at the abilities and also how you're going to deal with this hopefully in order to kill the boss. So whenever Ji-Kun casts the ability Feed Young, she will spit up little bits of food, isn't that lovely? And what she will do is she will send this food to the different platforms that are around the outside of the room. There's some on a lower tier and there's some on an upper tier, and you'll know which one she's going to send the food at because it'll have a big red beacon on it. No pun intended with the bird boss and the beak, and it was a very stupid joke. And what you can do is if you've noticed as I jump down to the platform, there's like these yellowy kind of slime balls, lovely balls of food that are heading towards the eggs on the lower level. If you intercept these, you will gain a little bit of a buff, which is quite useful, but you don't really need it for normal mode. And this buff will increase your damage and healing by 30% for 30 seconds. Now this will also be increased by 10% for every additional one you take, and you can get up to a maximum of 200% increased healing and damage. There is also a little bit of a price to pay for interrupting these and gaining a buff, and that's that you will take 50,000 nature damage every 5 seconds for 15 seconds, so that's 150,000 nature damage. It's nothing too taxing on your healers, and you'll also take increased damage by the next slimed debuff which you get on you, which is the nature damage, and it's also a stacking effect on you. So if you take one set of food that's going to the eggs and then move to a different platform, take a second set of food, you're going to be taking 10% increased damage, so it's what, 5,000 nature damage extra each time. It's nothing too much to worry about. So in order to take care of these platforms, what you'll need to do is split off 3 members of your raid, and that is 2 DPS and 1 healer, and you preferably want DPS players that are good at AoEing and cleaving damage, so we took a warrior and a shaman, I believe it was. And whenever Ji-Kun begins to feed the eggs that are on the bottom platform areas and also on the top platform areas, but we'll talk about them a bit later on because they act a bit differently, the hatchlings will want food down there. So what you need to do is you need to jump down to the platforms as fast as possible, and you need to then get your players to attack the hatchlings. Now these have small damaging abilities which are called cheap. Unfortunately, that's a very cheesy name for an ability, and it only deals like 30,000 physical damage, so it's nothing too taxing on your healer again. Now these hatchlings, if received enough food from Ji-Kun, can become fledglings, and these will attack random players, and they can also spawn incubated eggs. Now the fledglings deal a little bit more damage. They deal 150,000 physical damage at a random target, so you do need to make sure that the hatchlings aren't really becoming fledglings, because it's where problems start to occur. Now when the fledglings lay eggs, they will hatch juveniles, and the juveniles will fly about as it would happen. They're not very fun, these mobs, and when they fly over the main platform of Ji-Kun, they will periodically cast their own version of the cheap ability at a random target, and this will deal 200,000 physical damage to the victim. So on your lower level platforms, you need to be killing off all of the eggs and hatchlings as fast as you possibly can, and this is why you need your 2 DPS to have decent cleave and AoE damage. And while this is all going on up on the main platform, your raid just takes care of Ji-Kun and the abilities that were spoken about earlier on in the video. Now, like I've mentioned, the upper platforms do act a little bit differently to the lower ones, in the sense that the upper platforms will already have the mature eggs up there, and these will spawn the juveniles if you do not kill the eggs off fast enough. And if you're wondering how I flew up there in the video in the background, we'll speak about that at the end of the video. So what you need to do is, when you've flown up to those platforms, you need to kill off the juveniles if they spawn, and also the eggs, as fast as possible. Again, if you don't, the juveniles will just take off and they'll fly around the room and inflict 200,000 physical damage to any random player in the raid. This is kind of a priority, as it's a very, very big part of the fight. And finally, you're probably wondering, goodness, how are you flying around the room like a bit of a bird brain? Well, that's an easy one to answer. On the lower platforms, when you have killed off one of the eggs or one of the hatchlings, it will leave behind a feather for you to pick up. Now, this feather will grant a buff which has got 4 stacks on it, and it will allow you to have an extra action button on your screen, and then by pressing this button you can then take flight for 10 seconds. Please also note that only the lower bird platforms, not the upper ones, will leave the feathers behind for the buffs. So you do need to make sure that you have got a good enough amount of buffs for flying about if you're not going to the lower platforms. Now, as I've said, you can take flight for 10 seconds, and this does have a bit of a downside to it, because once you have picked up one feather, you will not be able to pick up another one for a minute. So you do need to make sure you aren't wasting it at all. You're able to drop from most places, like you probably noticed that I'm dropping from Ji-Kun's platform down to the lower nests, and from the upper nest back down to the platform. All full damage seems to just be negated in this fight. It just doesn't exist. If you notice back at the start of the video, I got my going down achievement. That could be an achievement gamers video, but it's not going to be. So that's going to do it for this encounter. It's really fun. I mean, if you like flying about, and if you like to list resort, then you're going to like this fight. So as always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Mr. Pandaria raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel.